Yeah.
Okay.
Just a moment, Mike.
All right.
And there we go.
All right, I think we are good to go, Niels.
All right.
Yes.
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
Hello and welcome to the LINBIT community meeting. My name is Michael. This is an open community meeting where every quarter we open the meeting to the public, where you'll receive updates from our latest LINBIT software developments and have the opportunity to get answers to any pressing questions that you may have. At the end of each section, we'll have a quick Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask then. You can also put them in the Zoom chat during the talks. So let's get the ball rolling with some developer spotlights to find out what the work has been being done on the LINBIT software. So first up, to talk with you about DRBD, we have Philip. So Philip, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so since this is the last community event this year, well, I want to reflect a little bit on the roadmap I presented like 1 year ago. And well, some of these things we presented a year ago, we achieved, like the RDMA transport is now merged and out there, but there's a catch to it. But we have a few open bug reports against it, so we cannot say it's really ready to use. The other thing we had on the roadmap was that we wanted to support multipath TCP in DRBD, and we had a look at it. But right now, the multipath TCP implementation upstream kernel lacks a few of those advanced features for use of the TCP stack. So the first experiments were not successful. So we had to delay that and move that out. DRBD 9.2 got released, so that's a plus. So we managed that. But yes, with the first release, we had false positives with the ping timeouts. So we released DRBD 9.2.1 to address that. And then it turned out that the problem even goes deeper, and we have reports from older kernels like RHEL 7 that we still have these false positive ping ACK timeouts. Good news is there is already a fix for that merged, but still we need to do the next DRBD 9.2 release. So yeah, and other topics we're working on is we have a quorum implementation in DRBD, but when we did that, DRBD was designed for, let's say, a static world, right? And now with LINSTO around it, that's no longer true. Nodes get removed and added and so on. So there were a few things missing in that area so that DRBD can deal with keeping quorum even if the cluster is incomplete and nodes get deleted or added. So here some work is already merged, some work is ongoing. And another thing we recently learned is the disk timeout feature. So that's a feature that is since a very long time in DRBD, and fortunately, not many people use it or rely on it, because you only need it if if you have hardware in your machines that behave like a tar pit. So you send them IO requests, and sometimes they fail in a way that they never deliver back an answer. So they never report back, okay, it was executed or there was an error. They just eat it. And that's a terrible behavior. And for that, we have the disk timeout feature, and it's broken, we found out. So we started all the work, get a test for it, start to work on fixing where it fails. So that's my status update from the DV. Oh, well, sorry, there's one thing I nearly forgot. And it's really important for this call. We have these roadmap items, and it is a loose concept, and we decide on it from our own thinking, what we think is best, what we think our user needs. And well, for a certain part, we for sure have that feedback from you through the ticket, through the channel, but we want to formalize this more, and we will publish a, let's say, user editable roadmap page on the web. And you guys will be able to move things, and with that, provide us feedback, what is more important for you, where should we put our focus on. So we are building this, and I expect that this goes online in for sure in Q1 23. I think that's it from my side, and with that, the word goes back to Michael. You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Philip. And if there are any questions anybody has, feel free to ask them now. If not, we can move on to the next section. And you can also just go ahead and leave them in the chat, and we can get back to them later in the meeting. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, maybe just a note on this, so people have also some time to ask their questions if there are some, to the roadmap. So when Phil mentioned it and talked about like give you access to edit it, to move it, we basically want to give you the chance to vote up certain items we already have in the backlog, or also request features for the backlog. So and then this will be either on the website or on the LINBIT.com profile.
All right, doesn't look like we have any questions right now, so let's move on to the next section. And up next, we have Johannes joining us to talk about migrating existing data partitions to WinDRBD. Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. I prepared a little presentation. What is usually not a problem under Linux is a little bit difficult under Windows is when you have lots of data. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Let's say you have 10 terabytes of databases, and you want to make it the data highly available with WinDRBD. There is a new trick that WinDRBD has learned. Yes, you have a databyte, and you don't want to copy it around because that might take several days. So what we used to do there is, first of all, hide the original file system from the Windows operating system. This has to happen because Windows would write to the backing disk without replicating it to the remote node. So we always hide the file system from the original file system from the Windows operating system. And what then happens is WinDVD creates another device on top of that and routes that requests through the DVD engine, also replicating it. And finally, WinDVD assigns a drive letter to this other device. And here's where the problems start. When a usual Windows block device needs to implement very many I/O controls and plug and play messages, and some of them are undocumented, and we can't implement them because we don't. We know that then, of course, the numbers, the hexadecimal numbers, but we can't tell what they're supposed to do. It's just not possible. Fortunately, yeah, and the consequence of this is that certain Microsoft applications like Microsoft SQL Server, newer versions do not run on top of this device. So what we do is make Windows think that the whole thing is a virtual disk. It will then stack automatically at least two important drivers over this device, and those drivers implement those system calls. So we don't need to re-implement them. We just use the existing Microsoft drivers to provide those undocumented system calls. And we do so by inserting GPT partition table before and after the file system data. This partition table only exists in RAM and also only as long as the resource is primary. So it gets destroyed once the resource becomes secondary, and it will be regenerated again once the resource becomes primary. So of course, we do this to be compatible also when there are undocumented system calls. As of now, we don't know of an application that does not run with such a setup. So I hope we can stick to it. And we also will finally patch out the drive letter patches from WinDVD. So some of you might know that you can specify a drive letter in the devices clause. So I hope this finally can go out. It's 5 years old, and I really would love to kill this code from the repository. Yeah, and I prepared a little demo. Part of this I will show you. I won't show you how to write the config file. It's actually very easy. Let me check etc. Migration. Yeah, it's just a regular DVD migration resource file. We use global unique IDs to address the disk and the meta disk. Of course, if you have other way around, if you want to reuse existing data, you have to provide storage for the meta disk. So what you usually want to do is either add a small disk to your node, or make the file system, shrink the file system, which is possible with data partitions on NTFS. So this is up to you how you do this. And yeah, so it's nothing particular. Yeah, it's just a usual resource file. And now I would like to show you what we have on there. And we have some data. Let's say we have lots of data. And we don't have a resource yet. We will now bring the resource up. And as a first step, you get a message that your backing device has been hidden from the system. So if I try to access it, I should get an error message like this. This is again to protect your data from not being replicated to the peer node. So if you access the backing device not via WinDRBD, you might get data corruption on that. And as a last step for now, I do I have it a primary, and you have to add the force parameter, which forces DRBD, also the Linux DRBD, to consider local data is up to date. So once we've done this, we see that there is a regular, I hope it works, yes. There's a disk, and this disk has a partition table in RAM, then it has the file system data, and then it has the backup partition table data. And to this disk, okay, first what I forgot is to remove this drive letter here. This is very easy, just remove it. Okay. Yeah, some warning message. I should have done this a little bit earlier, but I don't think that this is a problem now. I assign it to the WinDRBD device, and what should happen is, no, wrong drive letter, that we have our data here highly available, and also in the command shell, and the data hopefully is still there. Okay, we still have lots of data, so this can be terabytes. And as you see, the process is very short. So of course, you need to stop your services and restart them again with the new drive, with the new device, with the same drive letter. So you don't need to reconfigure your database file locations. And I think if you automate this in a script, you can do this in just a few seconds. So application downtime is very, very small on this. Yeah. So I hope that the trick with the partition table helps. Yeah, helps to solve this use case. And thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now or later. You can also drop me an email or ping me on Slack. Thank you very much for listening. And the word is back to Michael.
All right. Thank you very much, Johannes. Do we have any questions? Feel free to ask them now or in the Zoom chat.
I have one. Does it handle DRBD resizes?
Very good question. Actually, it you get a beer. No, it does handle it, but you have to bring the resource secondary and later primary. The reason for that is I could have made it online, but you know, once it becomes primary, it generates the partition table from the current size. And if I change it while I/O is going on, it's probably not a good idea. So I decided to enforce the user to bring the resource to stop the service, bring the resource secondary, and bring it primary again, resize and then primary again. Yes, but very good questions. Thank you, Roland.
Are there any other questions?
I might have one for Johannes, if I can say it in an understandable way. You mentioned that there's temporary use of RAM memory. Is that anything that somebody, is the amount anything that somebody would need to be concerned about? Or that
No, not at all. So I think the total is 128 kilobytes, not megabytes, kilobytes. So yeah, I don't think that this is a problem. The bitmap of DOBD is much, much larger. So, but thanks for asking, Michael. By the way, good that I see you. I wrote a knowledge base article on this. And maybe if somebody would want to try this once the 1.1.4 release is out, that would be awesome. Yeah, I have to say we are about to prepare the release, the 1.1.4. I hope it's going to be ready before Christmas, so we will see. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right, so let's move on to the next section. And up next, we're going to have a technology preview by Robert of the new DRBD Mon user interface. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. I'll share the screen here. Hope that works. So for everyone who maybe has not used DBD yet or has used the previous version of DBD Mon, this is the old one. This is what everyone knows. It's a monitoring utility that shows you the status of DBD resources and the difference as compared to DBD setup or DBD ADM, where you can just type DBD setup status, is that it gives you a live view of what's going on. So if something changes, you will immediately see what the change is. This is the old interface. There was also another tool that is called DBD Top. It looks like this. The difference being that DBD Mon only implemented monitoring, so you can only look at what's going on. You can't change anything. With DBD Top, you could switch to navigating and also run some actions like adjust or detach and attach disks, and you could look into the details of a disk. However, that would always freeze the view. So you only have a live view of the first page, and then the other pages you would have to freeze the view so you don't get live updates anymore, and then you could look at what the other resources are doing. The problem with DBD Mon, you can probably tell by looking at it, is it was not originally developed for users. I originally developed it for our developers, for myself mostly, because it didn't have anything that gave us a live overview of what was going on. And that was years ago, about 2014, I guess, I think is when I started. So it was only meant to be an internal tool, but since we didn't have anything comparable, we decided to just make it a little bit more approachable by, you know, it's not really self-explaining. You can kind of tell what the resources are, and you have volume symbols here and connection symbols, and if there's a problem, then they get their own line and more details. But most people, when they look at it the first time, they don't really know what's going on. Like, why is there 0? Why is there 1002? These are minor numbers and volume numbers. So at some point I decided, since we also give this utility to users, it would be a good idea to give it a user-friendly user interface, and that's what the new version is all about. I'll just hide that. This is what the new one looks like. very different. This is a list overview, so it's similar to dbt top now. And as you can see, also compared to dbt mon, some things are pretty much the same. Like everything that's green is something that is working as expected. Red resources or yellow signs are warnings and errors. You have those little error and warning flags here, and it has labels now, so you can tell that you have the resource here, you have your volumes here, you have your connections here. QRM is quorum. And what's probably most important is it has online help. So if you don't know what's going on, you can just press F1 and it'll give you help text. It's not finished yet. I just put the most important things into it right now. So this is all still work in progress. There is no release date right now, but you can expect it to be released pretty soon, probably early next year. This will explain on every page what the page does and what you can do. Obviously, you will have to take a look at volumes or connections as well. And to do that, you can just push tab, and that will give you a cursor. The difference compared to dbt top now is that you're still seeing live updates. So this does not freeze the view. You can just page through it. And if something changes, it'll just change underneath your cursor. And you can look at details in here. Either you just press enter, which is probably the intuitive thing to do, and it'll give you a summary of what that resource does. This one is degraded, for example, because one of the connections is degraded. And from there, you could go and take a look at the details of connections for that resource. F10 will bring you back to the previous page, or the volumes, and it will give you all the details of, for example, what the minor number for the volume is, whether it has quorum or not, whether it's resyncing or not, what the disk state is. Same for connections. And you can also do that directly. So if you don't want to go through the details view, which by the way is also available for volume, so you can navigate deeper in here. Same for connections, obviously. Just tab again. And if you highlight that and press enter, then you get details on that. Not a lot more because most of it is already shown on the list. But you can also go a little quicker if you know the hotkeys. They are pretty straightforward. C's for connections, V's for volumes. So if you just position your cursor somewhere and hit C, you go directly to the connections page. And with V, you go to the volumes page. Pretty easy. Let's see what else we have here. Yeah, I should probably explain what those marks are. So the red triangles are error marks. So those are alerts, is what I call them in the program. And the yellow ones are warnings. And those are different severities of what's going on here. For example, this one is for the connection. There is a connection alert here. And if you look at the connection, you see that one of them is not even connected to one of the peer nodes. That's where the alert is coming from. If you compare to this one, it only has a warning. Then, as you can see, both are connected, but there is something wrong with that connection, or actually with the peer volumes on that connection. And you can push V again here, and that will give you a peer volume view. So that shows you what's going on the peer node. And as you can see, the resources or the volume of that resource is this class on this other node, which does not directly affect my local node, but it's good to know that this other node that is supposed to be replicating doesn't replicate right now. That's why you get a warning for it. So not really a local problem, but just to make you aware that something is not right with this resource on another node. Those two different modes where you can just page through and where you can navigate through with the cursor have slightly different navigation, because if you just page through, then dbdmon will just stay on whichever page you're on. Right now, this is page 5 of 13. On the other hand, if you use the cursor, then it will automatically track the cursor. So if resources disappear or if new resources appear, then the cursor just stays on whatever resource you have selected, even if that resource moves to another page because other resources are inserted in front of it or behind it. So it tries to be a little bit more intelligent than our previous tools here, so that you can use it even if things are moving around all the time. And for the page navigation mode, this might be interesting for LINSTOR users. You can also just enter some page number that's not yet present, like 15, for example, if you know that more resources are being started, because dbdmon shows everything in alphabetic or alphanumerical order, and LINSTOR starts everything in alphanumerical order. So if you're starting all the resources, then you can just lock it to some page where you know something interesting will be on that page. And once that page pops up, once it has resources on it, dbdmon will stay on that page. Same for going to the last page. If you just want to know what the last resources were that had been started by LINSTOR, then you can just lock it to the last page. And no matter how many pages there will be, it'll just keep skipping to the next page until all the resources are started. You can see this little arrow here. If you go page up, page down, then if you go beyond the last page, then it'll just lock to the last page. So it has some kind of novel navigation features in this dbdmon version. What's also completely new is that you can also run actions now. So for example, if you go to resource number 10 and press enter again, you've probably already seen it. There's an action menu where I can just tell it to do something. Again, this is also just for users who don't really read the manual. Very easy to use. They're just all numbered. You just read what you want to do, type in the number. For example, make this primary. And then now it's primary. If you go back to the list, you can also see the symbol here, empty versus filled. So the filled ones are primaries. The R is for roll. And again, if you just hit the hotkey right here, you can directly go to actions. A for actions. It's always the same hotkey. Same thing here, make that primary. It's really easy. And you can do the same thing for multiple resources as well by just marking them. So space bar select 4 of them, actions, and then I don't know what we're gonna do with those. Let's disconnect them. And all of them will be disconnected. And obviously that generates a whole bunch of alerts here because now nothing is replicating, everything is disconnected. F4 clears the selection. And the same thing also works for example, connections. If you go to the connections page, mark this one, actions, connect, and this user should hopefully be, it seems it's disconnected on the P as well because it doesn't connect right now. Let's try another one. Maybe this one, I don't exactly, let's do volumes. So attach this volume. It's up to date and the resource has no alerts anymore. Also similar to what the original dbdmon did, you can press the P like Papa, P button, P key to switch to problems mode. And that will only show you resources that are in some weird state. They either have warnings or errors on them, and the other resources are just skipped. You can see those. And there are 2 different modes now for problems, either problems auto mode, which will only show you problems if there are any resources with problems, and otherwise will just show you the entire resource list. And problems lock will just always show resources with problems and never show resources that do not have problems. And the same thing again for connections and volumes. So if you're in problems lock, you will only see volumes that have some kind of problem. I think there's one resource somewhere where we have lots of volumes, this one. So for the volumes, for example, if I'm in problems log, I can only see 2, and it actually has 6 volumes. Only 2 of them are degraded somehow. They're both diskless in this case. What I didn't mention yet is navigation-wise, you can do most of the things with the mouse too. It has mouse controls as well. So if you just want to mark something, you can just go there, right-click, and you get the details. You can click most of those hotkeys, not those down here, but those up here, connections. And you can also mark things by clicking on the first column and then run actions on them, like connect. And those 2 are now connected. So it's not everything that you can do with the mouse, but most of the things are possible. Navigating, for example, you can close things. If you normally use F10, you could also just click on this cross. And for example, let's repair all those resources, actions. Let's just do adjust, and everything's fine again. So this is probably also a nice feature if you don't want to, arrow down 50 lines, just use your mouse, go somewhere. There's a command line as well. And that is on the one hand for dbdmon commands, because you can navigate to pages directly if you know what they're called. You have the short version of each page's name up here. So resource actions, for example, is RSCA. And you can just type in names if you know what the page's name is and go somewhere. Display resource list, for example. But also you can run dbd commands directly here. For example, right now they use double slashes. We'll probably kick that out and do everything with just 1 slash. You can, for example, do for this resource, disconnect again, and it'll use the context that you are on. So if you mark something, if you mark 2 resources and you do disconnect, I should do 2 slashes. That's why we're going to change that, because I forget it myself. I thought it would. Apparently it doesn't. As I said, work in progress. The idea was that it would do both of them. Another thing that you can do is disconnect and tell it what resource so you can use it with arguments. That's resource 23. Same for volumes. If you want to detach something, detach test resource 006 volume 0. So you can either use the cursor or you can do it with commands and just type in what you want to do. Those are the different possibilities here. And one interesting thing maybe is in the volumes view, you also have a sync view. And we'll just invalidate that, I guess, and see what's going on. Well, not the diskless ones, probably. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's attach those first. And by the way, sometimes we see this problem where it is negotiating with the version that I have on this node. And I will just disconnect and reconnect them because that normally clears them up. So connected seems good. And let's go to the volumes. So now we see it syncing. Same for this one. Actions, invalidate. And you don't really have to switch to the peer volume view anymore to see that, because it'll just figure out which one of the peers is resyncing and use the resync state from whatever peer that is. You could if you wanted to. So for example, if you look at the peer volumes here, then those are paused. This is sync target. This one is just paused. So the sync target for the other one is on the other node. So you can figure that out as well. But if you just want to know the local status, then you could just look at the local volumes page and you get whatever the other node is, it'll figure it out on its own and show you the sync status for that volume locally, because that is not actually reported by DBD. That is just extracted information that DBD-Mon figures out. Then, yeah, if you want to get rid of the cursor, by the way, you can just click on page. So instead of pressing tab, just another navigation detail, you can just click on page and get rid of the cursor. Obviously, clicking on the number lets you enter numbers, also pretty straightforward. Also cancels the cursor if you do that, because you can't be on a page and on the cursor at the same time. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense if it's cursor tracking. And then finally, there's also a main menu where you can just, yeah, need to close all those pages, where you can find all the things that you can do in here, like the resource overview. There's a message log where it logs whenever something goes wrong. For example, DBD event source failed at some point in time and then came back again. It failed because I killed it, just to show you how this feature works. So this is one thing. And then there's also, you can look at what all the tasks were that you had executed, or if some process is hanging, you could look at the active tasks. Right now, there are no active tasks, but you can figure out what the process IDs are of whatever DBD-Mon has started and not finished. Maybe if you want to do something on the console and kill a task or something like that, it's easy to figure out which ones are the tasks that DBD-Mon started. And then finally, you can also stop all resources from here. And maybe we'll make that a little bit harder with a safety question or something like that, so that people don't click it by accident and stop everything, because that's probably not something you want to do. And every time, it doesn't really matter whether anything is moving or not, you can always just, it's a good point in time to show you how that works. So you can always just navigate and look at it, and then it gets stopped. It's not there anymore. So it deals pretty nicely with things that are moving while it is trying to display things. Obviously, start all resources again. And again, you can just look what's going on, mark something. Let's see what this resource is doing. Flickers a little bit because of all the updates that it gets and where it needs to redraw the screen. Maybe you can mitigate that a little bit in one of the next versions that we will do after the initial one. And otherwise, you can just look at what's going on. And finally, maybe a nice feature is some people like bright backgrounds. So the colors are obviously not the greatest on bright backgrounds because of the bright green here and yellow for warnings and stuff like that. So you can also switch the color scheme. We should possibly wait until this actually shows something in green so we can actually see a difference here. Yeah, here, for example. So if you're using a light background, you can just switch that, and there will be a setup page for that where you can just choose as you don't need to know the command, but you can have different color schemes. And even if you have a terminal that does not support Unicode, you could even switch to ASCII so that it doesn't use Unicode characters, because some terminals don't like that and then everything looks messed up. So there's an ASCII version of the output, there's a Unicode version of the output, and there are multiple color versions. There's even a 16 color mode. Well, let's do light on this one probably. If the terminal can't do the 256 color mode that we normally use, you can use the 16 color mode. So there's a lot of functionality in this new version of DBD-Mon that the old version did not have. And it will hopefully make using DBD a lot easier, not just monitoring, but this thing is actually intended to be used for day-to-day operations, like just stopping a resource, restarting it again, just things that most people do every day. You could even, discard and resolve split brains. And I'm thinking about maybe building in some guided procedure that helps people resolve split brains in some future version. So there are already some things in my mind how this thing could be improved and extended to be really useful for users, especially with the tasks that most users who only occasionally use DBD struggle with, like split brain resolution, stuff like that. So this is the current state, and yeah, I think we can mostly close it here. Nothing really, not a lot other things to do here. Obviously, if there are any questions, I'm just looking at my list here. I think that's pretty much all of it that you can do right now. If there are any questions, obviously you can ask them now. And if there are no questions, then yeah.
Well, we did have a question in the chat.
Okay.
But you had such a detailed preview that you covered everything and answered the question before we even got to it. They had a question about the shortcuts to problem resources. So you've already answered that one. And if there are any other questions, feel free to ask them now, or you can also leave a comment in the YouTube video when it's published.
I had a quick question for you, Robert.
All right.
You showed, I think in the beginning, you showed a resource that had a warning label, the yellow label. And I believe it was a diskless resource, but then I think
that's this one here.
Okay. And then I think later I saw that there was a red label on another diskless resource. So is that like a difference between like intentionally diskless nodes, or?
Oh, that difference. The difference in that case was, I have it open right now. This is the one that shows the yellow warning mark on the connection. And that warning is on the connection to this other node that is called Ephesus. And on this other node, so the local node is Alexandria, by the way, this it says it up here. Ephesus is another node, and this one has a diskless peer volume. So my local volume, that would be this one. My local volume is up to date, actually. And the remote volume on Ephesus is diskless. That's why I get a warning. On the other hand, if I have a local resource that is diskless, we can just do that here. Let's go to the volumes, make that diskless, detach. Then in that case, it shows me an alert because that's locally on my local node.
Gotcha.
That's different.
That's the difference.
And there are actually even two different kinds of diskless, because there's the diskless client that is intentionally diskless because it never has a disk. It's just used as a DVD client, kind of like iSCSI, where you're just connecting to some kind of DVD server and accessing data on that server. And that is not reported as an error or warning. That is just a normal standard diskless node that shows up in green. And the other one where it's either administratively detached because you're, for example, you're replacing a hard drive or something like that, or because it was detached automatically because of an IO error or something like that. Those all show up as alerts if they're local, and they show up as warning if they're remote on another node. That's what it does.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert.
Do we have any other
questions? Thank you all as well.
Robert, can it cook coffee?
Well, maybe we can hook it up to a coffee machine, and we can send commands. So yeah, it does.
I think it does everything except cooking coffee.
More or less, yep. If you want that, we can probably do that as well.
Perfect.
Just add a command for that.
I wanted to also thank you, Robert, for this great improvement, and I can't wait to get the hands on that. Because we started using DRBDmon also quite often, since we are trying to use no quorum suspend IO, and we recognize that conflicts might occur much more often, which require manual resolution. And despite the overview you already get in LinStore, DRBDmon sometimes shows you actual errors which LinStore doesn't reflect. So in LinStore, the resource is green, but actually in DRBDmon, you see, or DRBD admin status, you see the actual problem. And especially the shortcut P helps you to get an overview very, very quickly. And even better, if you have the actions on that, you don't have to switch back to the CLI and do some manual DRBD admin commands, which you first have to look up if you are not used to it, how the command is correctly. So that's a fantastic improvement. And I want to ask, maybe you have an answer to that. Why does DRBDmon see more issues than LinStore? Why are in DRBDmon sometimes issues which don't get reflected in the LinStore volume list?
I mean, there are probably two answers to that. One is that DRBDmon is very detailed and probably more refined in figuring out what constitutes an alert and what constitutes a warning. So it has more information than LinStore does, more details, like for example, the exact sync status and which one of the peers is the one of the sync target, and it figures it out and puts it on a volume and stuff like that. But also, and this goes kind of two ways, because LinStore is more tolerant than DRBDmon. So there are sometimes, and this is very seldom, it could happen that DRBD produces events that do not really make sense. I haven't seen it in years, I think. This is probably something of the past. But imagine you get a volume line for an existing volume for a resource that doesn't exist, something like that. In LinStore, that would just be ignored because it didn't make any sense. So LinStore just goes, okay, this volume belongs to a resource. I just got an update for a volume that belongs to a resource that doesn't exist, so I'll just ignore that. DRBDmon does not ignore that. DRBDmon will just erase the entire state and reload it by restarting DRBD setup in the background. So it just goes back to zero, state zero, and tries to figure out what things are again. And it will also give you a warning in the message log about that if it happens. And even there's also a debug log for our developers where they can figure out what exactly the line was and why that didn't work. So it logs that as well. So I guess there are two answers to that. One is that DRBDmon tries a little bit harder, and the other one is that it's probably a little bit more refined with figuring out what exactly is an alert and what isn't.
Okay, fantastic. Because we stumbled over a problem just last week where a secondary had no quorum and it stayed in that state. And in LinStore, the resource was shown as up to date. And that was kind of confusing because we are only monitoring the LinStore state. But if the actual resource on the node is outdated and has no quorum, it could happen that on a switch over, your resource becomes really in a bad state.
I mean, especially for that case, I can probably give you a definitive answer because if I remember correctly, quorum is reported for volumes by DRBD. So the event line that tells you whether there's quorum or not is on the volume, not on the resource. And LinStore escalates a lot of DRBDmon escalates a lot of things. So if it sees no quorum on a single volume of the resource, then it will also report no quorum for the entire resource. And that might be something that LinStore doesn't do, because if you look at the volume list, you might see an alert for that single volume that lost quorum, if it's only one because it's detached on another node or something like that. But it will probably not mark the resource as not having quorum, because to do that, it would have to escalate from the volumes to the resource. And that is something that DRBDmon does, and I think LinStore doesn't.
But in LinStore, you see all the resources on every node, and even the one which is outdated or which has no quorum is shown as up to date. And that is, in my opinion, it's a bug because LinStore can't report something as up to date if there is actually no quorum on that secondary resource.
That should probably be fixed or extended to escalate from the volume if that was the problem.
I filed a bug, but I'm not sure in the correct project. I filed it in the DRBD GitHub project. Maybe someone will pick it up.
Well, we will just migrate it over if it belongs to LinStore. It's no problem. But yeah, so as I said, probably early next year is when you'll get your hands on the new dbdmon version. And then any fascinating new ideas that we have, we'll do later. So you'll do multiple iterations of it, and you'll get it pretty soon. As soon as we have help text in it or something like that, and it looks kind of finished. And then probably half a year later, something will probably add some new features as well.
Yeah, just wanted to ask, any plans for platforms other than Linux?
Yeah, that's one thing that I didn't mention so far. So this new version of dbdmon, I guess, should also be available on Windows. I can't exactly say when. It's pretty modular. So there are 3 things more or less, or let's say 4, that are platform dependent more or less. That is the terminal, because that works different on Linux or Unix as compared to Windows. So all terminal IO. Then the piping from dbd setup to dbdmon so that it can read events. Then the sub-process things where it starts dbd-adm and runs dbd setup commands and stuff like that. And then figuring out what the terminal dimensions are. And 2 of those are already portable. So that is the sub-process module that runs commands like dbd-adm and dbd setup from dbd-mon. That is already capable of running on Windows and even tested that works. And the other one that should be capable of running on Windows is the one that figures out what the terminal size is whenever it changes, because you can resize the window in dbdmon and it will just resize the output as well. And that is not tested yet, but it should work. A prototype of it was tested and it worked. So what's still missing is the terminal input, because keys and mouse and stuff like that works just completely differently on Windows. And the other thing that's not yet ported is piping from dbd setup. And there are also some other things involved, like an interval timer and some internal things in dbdmon. A wake up from the sub-process module to the core to show whenever process is finished and stuff like that. But all of that, I don't see many problems that I would encounter porting that. That should be pretty straightforward. It does more or less the same thing as the sub-process module, just a little bit more complicated. And I found all the APIs that I need for that, and I think it should be possible to port that to Windows in a reasonable amount of time. So those 2 modules are still missing. Once those are finished, it should run on Linux and on Windows. The one thing that we have already tested is running it through SSH from Windows to a Linux machine. So dbdmon running on Linux, but being shown on Windows in the Windows terminal, both CMD, the old one, and the new PowerShell, and all the functions worked. So and the Unicode output was okay, the colors were okay.
Mouse.
Key navigation, mouse navigation, both worked. So apparently the Windows terminals have caught up to the Linux terminals, because I think in like Windows XP or something like that, you didn't have mouse navigation in the CMD window. That is pretty new. But all of that worked.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert.
All right.
Are there any other questions for this? dbdmon's new interface looks fantastic, so I'm looking forward to trying it out. So if there's no other questions, and if you're watching it later and you have any questions, feel free to put those in the YouTube comments or contact the LINBIT experts directly if you want to. So thanks for joining us in the LINBIT community meeting. Also, be sure to like and subscribe the LINBIT YouTube channel to learn more about LINBIT and our software. And thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in just a LINBIT.
Happy holidays, guys. Soon.
Yep. Thanks for joining. Bye.